which was OADC 2024. And then they were the seventh best judge in Asia in Malaysia UADC in 2023. They've also been an open quarters panel, which is the judge at Belgrade Worlds as well. And yeah, they have been a coach at ISDS for the selection squad. And yeah, rest Abhishek Acharya can like take on the session, and we're immensely grateful for having them here. I hope you all have a wonderful session on science and technology. It's a really common or a trendy topic which is very prevalent in WSTCs as well. I hope you have a really fun time. All the best.
Yep. Hello, everyone. I hope I'm clearly audible. Okay, I think the recording has started, so I can begin the session. Just give me a second. I'm just sorting out my tabs. Also, yeah, I think I was also a student at IIT Bombay. That's primarily the reason why I'm taking the session on science and technology. But yeah, let's start that aside. So the purpose of the session will be very straightforward. Rather than focusing a lot in terms of what exactly would be part and parcel of science and technology, we'd rather focus on fundamental questions that are preconditions for these debates to function. I'll go over these subtopics once I introduce what I think are the broad motion types or motion subtypes that come under science and technology. Sharing my screen now. Tell me if everyone can see it.
Yep.
Yep. All of you can see my screen, right? Just give a thumbs up or something to indicate.
Yeah.
Or you can just type in chat, like anything works. Cool. Perfect. So yeah, starting off then, we'll first start with a set of motions. We aren't discussing these motions right now, but I'll just give you a general feel of, let's say, motions coming from, well, recent BP as well as WSCC tournaments. Let's see. But before that, the table of contents. The first types of motions, we'll just go over what are the motion types are being covered. Then we'll delve into all these specific motion types. So as you'll notice in science and technology, you have three broad buckets under which you have debates. The first is this house will use technology X. This could look like, well, many variations. It could just be, hey, a magical device has been created that allows people to speak the truth and only speak the truth. This house will use the technology. Or, for example, you know what? You have now somehow invented, let's say, a lens that allows you to see whether or not someone likes you or dislikes you. Or, for example, you probably somehow now have technology that can predict the future, or let's say tell if someone's going to be a criminal or not, or things along those lines. Basically themes that you probably see in many pop culture, TV shows, movies, etc. That CAs have used to say that, hey, this would be a fun debate. Let's go and have that. Well, many of these aren't exactly science and technology debates, but they very often are, one, categorized into this bucket, but two, have heavily overlapping themes with broad science and technology motions, which is why I think it's useful to see. Now, I think all of you must have gotten sick and tired of hearing it because, well, it's everywhere now. Almost every other tournament has at least one motion on AI/ML, how it's going to take away all our jobs, how it's going to kill creative jobs, how artists will no longer have any employment, etc., etc. So we'll go to broad themes in these AI/ML motions and what you can do about them. We won't go into a lot of detail in terms of how AI/ML works, but rather we'll have a larger focus on how AI/ML affects society, people's habits, and jobs. And the final one is what I like the most, but is also one of the rarest types of science and technology motions, the actual science and technology motions. This probably was much more common 21, like the very initial school debates, which is this house would prefer space exploration or ocean exploration. Let's say technologies that counter climate change as compared to adaptable technologies that allow you to adapt to the new climate. Or even, let's say, if you're being more specific, let's say things in terms of whether or not patent protection should exist for, let's say, products or for medicines and things along those lines. So a wide variety of actual science debates, but they're a little less frequent right now. We'll still go over them because it's very useful to know what all you could do in such motions. Now, let's have an introduction, which is, well, an overview of common motion types. The motions are there in front of you. I'll let you read them. I'll read them out as well. The purpose of this is, well, me just selecting, going over the past 7, 8 competitions that just happened over the past 2, 3 months, and picking out the motions that would theme science and technology in them, will just give us a view of what the current meta looks like. This house believes that humans should invest a considerable amount of resources into exploration of deep space. This falls under, let's say, your classic science and technology themes of motions, very naturally discussing science and tech. Then, for example, this house believes that the AI race does more harm than good. The AI race refers to a competitive pursuit between among nations, corporations, research institutions to develop artificial intelligence technologies, yada yada yada. Then a motion that's probably more themed along, we'll invent some random technology. Assuming feasibility, this house would wire all humans with synesthesia. Synesthesia is a phenomena that causes sensory crossover, such as tasting colors, feeling sounds, seeing emotions. Some people describe it as having wires cross in their brains because it activates two or more senses um, when there's only reason for one to activate. And well, another possible motion is, for example, this house hopes for widespread adoption of polygenic screening for mental health conditions. Polygenic screening refers to genetic screening of IVF embryos prior to implantation, by analyzing embryo's genetic profile and assigning them a risk score. The score can be used to make predictions about how likely the embryo would be to be born or develop health conditions and traits. Now, of course, we are not going to discuss these debates. These are potentially more so in terms of homework, in case you want to apply the learnings or the themes from this, let's say, discussion elsewhere. These you can probably use as some form of reference later on. We'll actually move on after some other set of motions. These I won't read out loud. I'll just give you 2 minutes to go through today's discussion, which is the broad themes in many of these motion types. Cool. Assuming you have read this, let's now move on. The reason why we're bucketing all of these motions are to find common clashes and common burdens. The idea is at the end of the session, I would have some questions for you in terms of how exactly do you go ahead and view debates that belong to, let's say, the science and technology team. And what are the first questions you ask yourself in prep time of what you're building a case on, and what are the main problems and burdens you need to challenge? Cool. So now this house will use technology X motion. A lot of this is just magic, wherein you're just inventing technologies. Over here, we won't question the feasibility of technologies as much. We'll rather focus on how they are influencing society at net. So yeah, over here, you are to an extent redefining how the world will behave when, let's say, this technology is introduced. You're having a big change from status quo. At the same time, you'll notice that many of the trade-offs as well as many of the clashes you're having are the same old generic clashes that happen in many debates. But what are these clashes and what are these debates? Well, are these technologies going to be readily be available on the market? What exactly does the distribution look like? The second is similar, which is in terms of inequality. This means that, for example, is there any difference in, let's say, how this technology affects the rich versus the poor? Do, let's say, the rich become richer? Are they able to further entrench wealth? So, for example, if, let's say, we have any technology that affects human behavior, let's say, in this instance, it could just be, well, let's see. Yeah, it could just be gene editing technology or something along those lines, wherein now you can potentially choose traits that you think are more beneficial, right? For example, you can potentially remove diseases, potentially make your child fitter, faster, smarter, taller, etc., etc. What will this do? Well, Will this lead to, let's say, the rich choosing the best trade in terms of wealth in the first place, which is why they end up occupying all the top spots? Or is it rather that poorer folks will longer, say, eliminate bad traits that were potentially limiting them before? These are all potential variations that come under the inequality bucket of, let's say, clashes. And this is something that can be explored in this motion. It allows the most room for, let's say, creative thought for you all. So let's see what can be done over here. In terms of usage, there are two main questions to be asked. One, is this device easy to use? Can everyone use it? But the second is that if everyone can use it, is there any, let's say, skill curve to it? For example, if let's say we're playing any sport, right? If even if everyone can hold a TT racket, the difference in people's ability to hold TT rackets differ by a great margin, or play TT differs by a great margin, because there are lots of elements of skill involved in terms of how well you can use this racket. Can you do top spin? Can you do back spin? Can you do a forehand smash, etc., etc. Very similarly, for these devices, is there such a skill gap? And if there exists such a skill gap, who does it benefit and who does it reward? Like, what are the mental traits or physical traits you're looking for that potentially allow to maximize the devices? There's a third thing that you think of in terms of seeing which are the parties that benefit from this and which are the parties that are harmed by it. The fourth thing over here is societal upheaval. Now, the way you want to think about this, the way you want to think about this is, to what extent is society changing at the point of time you are going to go ahead and introduce the technology? Are your habits changing? Are broad societal structures changing? Are we having new jobs? Are we losing old jobs? Are we going to have different expectations from people? So, for example, if I can see your mood, do I treat you differently? Am I more empathetic towards you? Am I more rude towards you? Am I more kind? Do I form more friends if I'm an introvert? Do I form less friends if I'm an extrovert? So you're probably looking at broad habits changing or broad expectations changing. We're looking at the idea of societal overhaul. So now that these themes have been introduced, we'll first go into a small activity wherein we discuss emotion, and then we'll go further down into these themes and see what the sub, let's say, parts of them. So activity number one, everyone take your time. I'll read the motion out first. Info slide, you're an engineer. Your corporation has secretly developed a machine that can unerringly predict the future of all newborn children, such as whether or not the child grows up to be a serial killer, a doctor who can cure cancer. The government gets a wind of this invention and compels you to hand over this machine. Motion, this sounds like the engineer would choose to destroy the machine. So now what I want you all to do is take some time. I'll give you around 3 minutes. So we'll take a 3 minute silent time. And you all tell me all the different ways in which we can use this technology. Does anyone have any doubts in the motion? Please unmute and tell me if you do. Any questions, guys? Cool. If you don't have any questions, okay, go ahead, Preksha.
So, in this motion, do we simply assume that there's no way that that future can be changed in any manner if we already have a hindsight of it?
So no, this is up for debate.
Okay,
So this is entirely part of the debate whether you think people can be changed or cannot be changed, etc., etc.
right, thank you.
So I'll just make you all focus on one key word over here. The machine can unerringly predict the future of all newborn children. This means that if, let's say, the future is changed by a very large extent, it'll obviously be an error, and hence the machine cannot be unerring, which means the info side is contradictory. So do keep that in mind when you're framing your arguments or framing your ideas. Okay, 3 minutes are up. Guys, let's discuss. Anyone who's unmuting first? Please go ahead. Tell me. Go for it, Sankrit.
Yes, sir. I
Sankrit.
have one point. Yeah. So I was thinking, like, if the machine which predicts the future of people, and certain people have a negative future, let's say it's either a crime or it's something which is not beneficial to mankind, or something like that happens. I feel that they could a new organization, or even like a set of people could actually help them overcome this and keep a close eye on them, not in such a way that it would actually affect their mental health, but in a way which would provide them with the resources, or the additional help which is required to them to actually make their life better.
Okay. I mean, I think that is fair. The question we probably want to ask is it worth doing? Like, do you necessarily want to spend resources in this way? Because let's assume there are a large number of people who potentially are, let's say, potential criminals based on this machine. Do you think it's worth developing a very large spy network or an organization that actively monitors them secretively and somehow intervenes just in time to ensure that they don't commit any crimes? Like, is that likely? Is the question I'm trying to ask you.
So can I think of just a little while?
Sure. No worries. Preksha, go ahead.
So just something similar to that, like the government could tie up with an organization that sort of isolates them in a different manner to be able to bring them up in a way that it could be possible to change their future, because without this specific technology in the status quo, there's currently nothing happening which is productive, because there's still going to be people that could possibly become serial killers in the future, but we won't be aware of it. However, if this machine exists, then at least we'll have a prior warning and we can actually do something to change that. So isn't that better than the current status quo that we have?
Yep, I think that's very fair. Um, does anyone want to, let's say, explore any other theme apart from, let's say, murderers or criminals? Uh, um, by the way, I would really prefer people, let's say, are answering on voice as compared to text. Um, yep, Sri Radha as well as uh, Adrian, great points. Anyone else? You can just unmute and speak.
So we could also consider people who can turn up to be great scientists, or people who have revolutionary ideas, as mentioned in the info slide about curing cancer. So that way we know that if the person has the ability and the IQ to be able to develop something like that, we could give them a better level and quality of education, because we'll know that it will be worth it in the future if they're going to have such revolutionary ideas that will help the society.
That's fair, Kabir.
Should I speak?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah. Like for every earthquake, we have like a pre-alarm, like we set up devices so we can like get to know when the earthquake's about to happen. So I think this should also be used for humanity. So we
Your voice
can
cut off.
possibly be a threat to humanity in the future, or maybe help humanity in the future in that case.
Okay, Sri Radha, would like to go next.
Yeah, it's more of a question rather than an answer. So, what my doubt was that, in the sense of unerringly predict the future of all newborn children, wouldn't that largely also apply to how long they live? So, insofar as the motion goes, that would imply that the government can't really kill people because it wants to, because that would once again be an error in the entire system. Because it only says as an example that it's professions, but it never mentions anything about the lifespan and everything. So is it up to the contextualization to exploit that point, or would that largely be excluded?
So I would think that, let's say, things on lifespan, etc., are not necessarily part of debate, mainly because the infosec doesn't explicitly mention this, but also it doesn't really change a lot in the round. Another thing. So, okay, if you think that, let's say, fate is predetermined, wherein you can't change people because of, let's say, the future predicted for them, the debate doesn't work, or at least it doesn't work in the sense that, well, since fate cannot be changed, any action that you'll end up doing will ensure that there's no change being made. On the other hand, if fate can be changed, and you, for example, let's say, kill someone who's going to be a criminal, that means their fate has been changed, which creates a paradox. That probably then means there's some ability for you to influence their fate, even if it's not a very large ability. That being said, a few things. I'll just go on to the next slide in terms of what potentially can be discussed. The first is very straightforward. You are better at nurturing people. So, for example, if you know someone's going to be engineer, doctor, as many of you suggested, you can potentially put them in special schools, ensure they get better quality education, ensure they're pursuing research, things along those lines to ensure they have a more productive output. You can then potentially discuss whether productive output is in fact a very good thing, or for example, whether it leads to more growth in science and technology, which then leads to further benefits, etc., etc. The second is, once again, as we discussed, crime prevention. Then now you can potentially profile individuals. Now, what you do with them is up to debate. There are multiple things that you can potentially do that range from very cruel to, let's say, much more civil. It's up to you to decide whether or not those actions are worth the cost and moral trade-off. And if, let's say, you believe they're worth certain trade-offs, then why are they worth those trade-offs, or things that you'd up to justify? That's once again another direction in which this debate can be done. I think a large part of debate happens in the middle ground, where you're not talking about extreme cases of some people becoming serial killers, or for example, some people becoming, let's say, extremely brilliant people like Albert Einstein, etc. Because those are in fact, well, the extreme edge cases, right? Very few people end up falling into either of those buckets. What probably happens much more often is just general discrimination. We are putting people into buckets of what they'll be, whether or not they'll be a person of significance or not, whether they'll be famous or not, things along those lines. So that probably leads to a much more hopeless world per se, but it leads to a world where people do not have as much belief in themselves or believe that they can do whatever they wish to achieve. But yeah, Preksha, go ahead.
Sir, is this a policy motion?
Nope, it's not.
Okay, but just a question. If it was a policy motion, could we have said that the information that the machine reveals can just be limited to like restricting it simply to the government knowing it, or like to just the family of the person knowing it, instead of it being revealed to the entire world, which would like prevent discrimination to an extent?
Uh, yes, you can potentially do that. Yes.
Right, thank you.
But even in those instances, I think the discrimination to some extent will still exist. Wherein, if let's say they're
Yeah,
specialized to do any of these things, right? For example, doing any form of segregation would mean that you're discriminating against other people or telling them they're not as special. That's kind of a precondition to it, right?
right.
So even if you can reduce the scale of discrimination, they'll exist to some extent either way.
Understood,
Now
sir.
let's further delve into themes. Let's use this activity as, let's say, a base and discuss further themes that can occur in this type of motions. Let's first talk about access. Now, in the previous motion that we had, over here, it did seem that the access was relatively exclusive because there's only one machine. But in case the technology is more broader, the question could just be that, hey, is this technology free or not? Or is it paid for? Can you think of motion types that probably, let's say, resemble this? I'll give a few motion types and tell me whether or not you think, let's say, these are fully accessible or how they're accessible. If, let's say, technology of the motion in question is, this will allow gene editing technology to all parents. Do you think that's going to be free for everyone or it's going to be paid? Answers in chat. Just reply free or paid. Other people, you can answer as well. Now, the reason why you're all saying paid is because your general intuition that the gene editing technology is something that's expensive, that requires lots of years of R&D, and hence if it's not paid, then it can't really be, the cost can't be recouped, right? You can't really make back the profits, etc. This is probably the intuition why you're saying it's paid. Similarly, that means you want to look out for a few things. When you're reading the motion, you first want to look out for any caveat if there's a government fiat that allows subsidization or allows free access. If not, you probably want to push a point that this technology is going to be paid in the first place. The second thing is probably, if let's say you think it's going to be paid, you probably want to tell me how expensive is it going to be. And I think this exactly falls in line with the next idea of whether or not it's available. Let's take another idea, right? Let's assume that we, let's say, have a certain machine that can, let's say, tell you, or that can, let's see, what example can I go for? Okay, imagine you have a machine that can give you, tell you what is the most optimal career path for you. So when you're 18, instead of, let's say, relying on what university, etc., you want to go to, you just enter this machine and you try to go for it for career counseling. It fully scans you and tells you, let's say, what all can you do or what all can't you do. Do you think this machine, let's say, for the purpose of debate, would have a limited supply or relatively unlimited supply? No, okay. So this is a bit fun because, at least for the purpose of the debate, even if your intuition might say it will be limited, it's most likely to be unlimited so that everyone's on a level playing field. Otherwise, the debate won't fully work. But in other cases, you can potentially think that, hey, look, if this technology is limited, then who exactly gets access to it first? And then who exactly uses it more than other people? In that case, there's going to be a difference of who is accessing it. It's going to be the rich, it's going to be the privileged, or it's going to be the underprivileged. And then how does it work out? The third aspect of this is potentially maintenance. Now, this is similar to the other two themes. Let's imagine, let's say you have some wearable glasses or some technology that is like some VR, AR technology, right? Virtual reality or something. And let's assume for the timing that's freely given out to everyone. Do you think these technologies are free to maintain? Or do you require some form of maintenance, some form of, let's say, scheduled repair work, some form of, let's say, software updates or packages that you need to buy further, etc., etc. In case of, let's say, any AR, VR headset. What's your thoughts on this? Guys, let's be more interactive in chat, right? Let's just go for your first instinct. No one's really, let's say, scoring you on all this. What do you think? Just type it out in chat. Cool. Now, what is the bottom line that you're trying to get via all of these things? If, let's say, maintenance is required, as many of you are suggesting, that probably then means that for someone who's been gifted this technology by the government but aren't able to maintain it themselves, face some difficulties in using this over time, they probably need either more money to use it effectively and to continue having the same level playing field as other people, or, for example, they are not able to, let's say, maintain it and hence lose access to this money. So there are two things that you want to. If you're a side government, then you potentially think of these issues and try to model them out in the first place and say that, let's say, the government is going to take care of this funding, the government is going to take care of the availability, the government's going to take care of maintenance, so how are they going to do so that you won't be questioned on this. And if you're opposition and your government doesn't really model this out and the info set doesn't really cover this, it's a potential weak point that you can target your government on and say that, hey, this is a very big flaw because this means that something's going to happen. What is this something? This something is, well, next slide, please. Slides are moving. Slide is moving now. Inequality. So the biggest problem with access not being equal in any way, as we described previously, is that it creates more inequality amongst the people. Now, inequality is very straightforward, right? You have people who are rich and people who are poor. And the first question you ask is whether the wealth gap increases or not. The main technologies make human beings more productive. This could look like bodily modification. This could look like gene editing. This could look like having additional tools that allow you to perceive a new sense or something along those lines. Many emotions about these topics. Anything that, let's say, goes makes people superhuman at some level also entrench inequality because the rich have pre-existing advantages. The more advantages means they're able to use these advantages better than people who don't have the advantages, and hence you're increasing the wealth gap. Does this idea make sense? Yes, no, use thumbs ups, use something. So inequality and access are very, very closely linked. If you don't have access, then it is breeding ground for inequality. Inequality in itself is bad, and there are many ways in which this inequality can increase. Let's look at other things. There's another potential idea of vulnerability. Now, vulnerability is a bit different from your classic divide between rich and poor. It's a bit more nuanced. So let's think of it this way. If you have a technology that allows you to access into people's thoughts or people's minds, what happens if this technology exists? Are there some people who are affected more badly by it than others? Potentially, yes. This potentially looks like a group of people who have traumatic memories, people who were potentially abused when they were children, people who have potentially gone through war, people who have potentially gone through horrific crimes, because you don't remember these memories. Right? These memories have been sealed deep in their conscious, and them being evoked causes them deep pain and trauma. So let's say if you're having technology related memory, then many of these people are more vulnerable than other individuals, and there's potential harm for them in terms of them being exploited. Once again, this will also tie back into usage. All of these technologies are interlinked. The final thing is in terms of asymmetric benefits. Asymmetric benefits looks like this is another form of inequality, but this is a bit different from wealth. This is more so based on ability. The idea over here is to identify which groups are able to gain a disproportionate benefit from this. Will minorities benefit more from this technology occurring? If, for example, we have technology that goes ahead and is able to assess what a group wants or what a group thinks or whether a group is hostile or not. Would you think this would benefit minorities or not? Do you think, let's say, we're a politician who's canvassing and they're able to see this infographic in front of them? How would they react to it? Would they react in a beneficial manner? Would they have more pro-minority policies? Would they have more anti-minority policies? So that is a way of thinking maybe more on, let's say, ethnic lines, maybe more on ability baselines, maybe more on intelligence baselines. Is there any difference between these groups? And hence, if there's any difference between these groups, are there any asymmetric benefits created, let's say, between these people? This is once again another potential line that you can think of in terms of any new technology motion. Before I move on, any questions by anyone or any doubts? Seeing none. Let's go on to usage. All of this is interlinked. Now, if you're talking about usage, now usage is fun because, well, usage has many interesting subcases in it. One of the most common benefits that we see, or most common usage-based questions that will come out, is when, let's say, you're interacting with the person's emotions, whether they're telling the truth or not, whether or not you have access to their memories or not. So the idea over here is, for example, if you can access someone else's memories, or you can rewind your own memories, if that's what the technology allows. Are these used in beneficial ways, or are these forced upon you? Are the police going to use them for interrogation? There's the first dichotomy that exists in this. You don't know who's going to use it and how they're going to be used, which then means you're a burden of doing a likelihood framing of how it's going to be used and whether or not it's going to be good or bad, harmful or beneficial, etc. The second part of this is a skill issue problem, which we talked about before. The skill issue is something on the lines of, hey, let's say I have access to my previous memories. Is this going to be therapeutic for me? Can I use this in a manner to go and reflect on myself? Or am I actually going to feel depressed about it? If I look at my own errors, do I feel motivation that, hey, these are XYZ things I can improve on? Or do I feel sad that, hey, I messed up in XYZ manners and I'm feeling really, really bad about it? So that depends on, to an extent, skill, that depends on mentality. It's another part of usage, right? Whether or not this usage is beneficial for people. Now note, these three headings that we've discussed so far are rather broad. That also means they're going to be used for other cases as well. In the sense, when you're talking about other technologies, may it be related to climate change, may it be related to AI, ML, these are also potentially headings you can consider for them and potentially clash that are used within them, especially AIML, because the same headings actually repeat to some extent. The final thing that we'll discuss on over here is societal upheaval. This is fun because now, in many instances, you need to develop or reimagine the world, wherein you're creating either a world from scratch where this technology exists from the get-go, or you're thinking about a world where, let's say, you are significantly altering people's behavior. What alterations are we talking about? Let's say, for example, we go back to our motion and we have this technology that goes ahead and, well, predicts the future for babies, right? What does that change? Does it change jobs? I think change jobs to a large extent because now let's say all of your education, counseling, business, and all of that goes away to a great extent. But secondarily, I would probably argue there's a lot more specialization in jobs when you have such a predictor, because now like, hey, these people are going to this field, we'll probably make them specialize in this particular area. That's one degree of specialization I can think of. I think there are potentially many, many more. The third part of this is, well, expectations. What do the expectations look like? Hey, look, if let's say you're having fun, and not you're not having fun. I mean, if let's say you're able to view something different about people, let's say you're the synesthesia emotion, right? Wherein you're able to see, let's say, different emotions or different experiences or combine things. What ends up happening over here is this significantly alters your perception of people. If the perception that you have for people is altered, does that also go ahead and affect, let's say, the way you expect things from them? Do I, let's say, view someone more positively in case I think they think of me positively, or do I hold less hope for them? That's a question to be asked. Very similarly, I think I potentially have more expectations, right? Because I'm like, hey, they think positively of me, they probably treat me well, something along those lines. So potentially anything that, let's say, touches upon your emotions probably alters the expectations you have from someone. Similarly, in terms of habits, when you see expectations change and when you think what is viable changes, what your habits are also potentially change. Now over here, there's a general criteria that are generally that, let's say, maybe people go to gods, pray to temples, etc. when they're having a child. When you have this machine and the government does an evaluation for you, going back to, let's say, the government and baby motion, does that change this habit? Do you retain these? Do you still retain these norms, or do you have different norms in place now? You probably have different norms because now the one who's deciding the future is probably something different, and your ability to feel that you can change the future has also changed along these lines. All of this is to indicate, and once again, most of this is just food for thought in terms of different ways of which you can think about motions. So while many of these are not directly applicable, you can potentially go through the lecture again after the slides are shared with you and see where, let's say, in the sample motion is given, what all subclauses you can use and what are criteria you can use to evaluate it. It's more in the second motion type, which is AIML. There's much more concrete things to be discussed over here. We move from a more abstract discussion to a more concrete discussion now. So yeah, well, AI is taking over everything. Jobs are gone, creativity is gone, copying is rampant, especially many of you are giving exams right now. Might have felt, hey, I can just put that assignment in chat GPT instead of doing it myself. That's probably way, way more easier. But now, how do we get this new world into control? What exactly are we doing over here? You will notice that the societal upheaval theme is common across all three motion types. That's largely because technology affects to a great deal how convenient actions are for people, and convenience of action decides what actions people do more frequently or less frequently. I'll give you a minute to review, let's say, the slides, and I'll go over them one by one. But yeah, we have a short activity in between. Cool. I hope you have got the slides. A few things now. Let's first talk on habits. Would anyone say that ChatGPT has changed the way to do stuff previously? Anyone would want to raise their hands and probably say things that they do now because of ChatGPT that they didn't do before? Kabir, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, you can make assignments much easier because you can use ChatGPT to just write your assignment and paraphrase it, and that's so much easier.
That's perfect. Yeah. Okay, Preksha.
Multiple activities, like I've noticed that since ChatGPT came in the picture, like a lot of people, instead of just doing convenient and simple tasks on their own, they prefer to have ChatGPT do them, like writing an invitation or an application or a leave application. So the simplest of things which we could do on our own, since it's more convenient, we rely on ChatGPT to do it for us.
Excellent point. Do you think that also means that people are losing the skills of doing these activities themselves?
Yes, and while that's like sometimes convenient and necessary because more or less it's just a waste of time to write it on your own, but it's also like making us lose the skill of being able to do it on our own.
Cool. Sankrit.
Yes, it's pretty much almost the same. So basically, like scripts for plays or let it be essays, and even itineraries for planning, recipes. Everything is made on ChatGPT nowadays, and people are losing that artistic touch and that original the effect that it used to give on earlier.
I think that's very good, and let's use that to caveat into jobs. Do you think ChatGPT is affecting the jobs people have right now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Cool. Well, we'll discuss that a bit further. In terms of training, how much do you all know about how ChatGPT and other AI models are trained? Good idea, not much of an idea, bad idea.
Could you repeat your
Kabir, go ahead.
question? From the
Uh,
already given, should I speak?
yes, yes.
Yeah, from the already given data and like the software, like the whole Google search engine, so it just picks up small bits of information and it just piles up an answer, I think.
So can I also answer?
Yep, sure.
Yes, so I feel it's like they program it in such a way so that it mimics the user and it makes sure that the responses which are given are very similar to what response a person would get without using ChatGPT as well.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Okay. I think, and do you think ChatGPT is going to, let's say, in the future, or let's say AI is going to, let's say, change a lot of societal values in the future? Just do a thumbs up if you think there's going to be a lot of changes in society because of ChatGPT or similar large language models. Doing this, let's move on to, let's say, our next activity. And my voice is hurting a bit, so I'll take a small break. Guys, read it out. Once again, similar to before, 3 minutes. Let's see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Tell me. What are your answers? What do you think are the trade-offs that is going to happen in this round? I mean, in this debate.
So can I speak?
Yeah, go for it.
Yes, sir.
You hear me,
Yes.
right?
So, yes, it's just breaking a bit, sir.
No worries, no worries.
Yes. Yes, sir. So I feel there'd be a lot of unemployment created as people who actually have interest and individuals who want to work hard and learn the subject and actually work in that field would be replaced because this AI is actually cheaper and it's faster and more efficient to operate. So the companies would start firing everyone. And I don't know whether this point is valid, but I feel it'll be like there's a huge security risk as it's easily it may be not easy, but it's like it's possible for hacking and it could result in a lot of data breach, etc.
Yep. I think that's very fair. Anyone else? Guys, just unmute. Don't wait for me to say your name. Unmute. Preksha, Niyati, just unmute.
So I believe like there's a lot of disadvantages, but a lot of advantages to this as well. Like the disadvantages would include that a person's creativity dies, their thought originality will die, and they won't like independently do tasks anymore, which will also affect their confidence because they'll feel like they're not doing as good as AI would be able to do, which is why they won't like take the initiative to do something independently on their own. It'll also affect the way that humans interact with others because there'll obviously be lesser interaction. Like if there's an assignment, you could have gone and asked your teacher if you had a doubt, but now you have AI, so there's like less approachability towards the teacher because the AI will help you faster and more efficiently. And the advantages include that there's a lot of time saved, your efficiency is bettered, and you're more easily able to like ask details about something that you have a problem in instead of asking a real human being and wasting their time for it per se.
I think that's great, but we want to keep this specific to Devin, the software engineer, a bit more. So let's look at what Devin, a software engineer in particular, would do. They're very generic answers, of course. But yeah, let's see. The first is, and I think this should be the first thing that you all should write down, is just faster development. If you have an AI developer that's probably better than an average human developer, then this simply means you're developing things faster. This means products takes less time to build. This means products are launched faster to the market, etc., etc. As Priksha pointed out, this also makes training a bit worse because now many people, instead of doing a trial and error learning on job or learning in, let's say, schools, are now relying on AI, right? The AI is going to do the assignment for them, or at least partially do the assignment for them. This also probably means that instead of debugging themselves, they probably use the AI for the same. Adrian, go ahead.
Hello. I was just wondering, when there's Devin, it properly democratize AI as a tool or democratize software such technology, especially for countries that are poor, let's say like less developed countries where they currently do not have a lot of software talents. So when there's Devin, the advancement of technology will be super fast in those areas, like super fast. But the trade-off is perhaps there's no there's less of a leadership uh, by one country or a few countries, and that is probably bad in a political sense. I'm not sure, but that's an idea.
That let's say yes, it probably means that if let's say you go ahead have well a country that doesn't have as much of a quality software engineering base, or let's say does not have a lot of right technology, they can do a lot of things if let's say they have Devin. It also probably means that they have an over reliance on dev, right? Because we don't know, for example, how long the software will be free for, to what extent will we retain access to it. Can you go ahead and install these things if, let's say, Devin is not available, things, etc., along those lines, right? Because if, let's say, you're building this entirely from scratch based on this AI, this also means you're entirely relying on this AI to keep this thing running. That's the first trade-off in terms of, let's say, development versus security slash reliability. I think the second thing is just straight up on jobs, no? Because this is relatively interesting, because it happens on a multi-fold level. If Devin is very good, then you have less human beings who are employed for these jobs, because in many instances, human beings are employed when there's redundancy, which is that many people are doing the same job, or many people are doing the same job relatively slowly, and hence there are many jobs required. If one guy does it much, much faster, then they kind of just can keep that one guy or two guys as compared to keeping the five people who are doing that thing. Devin is that one guy who's doing it fast, but let's say there are many copies of Devin because, well, it's a software, it can be replicated easily. This means there are overall less jobs, but it also probably means in case of any downtime, or when you don't have electricity, when you have any other problems, then you might end up facing some glitches or some problems because you don't know or you don't have the capability to go ahead and solve these problems by yourselves. And that's what we further explore in, let's say, these themes. This is first, habit. As we discussed in theme of learning before, how exactly are you learning? Are you relying on Wikipedia? Are you relying on ChatGPT? Are you learning by yourself? Are you understanding the concept, or you just want to get the answer via, let's say, the software tool? This is the first thing that's affected. Let's say if you have AI, that just gives you the answer very conveniently. It basically a superpowered Google in the first go. The second thing is, well, advice. Who exactly are you asking for in terms of advice? This basically looks like, do you want cooking recipes? Or for example, do you want, let's say, advice on how to build a body? Or you're looking for medical advice? In many instances, people are going for specialized information for ChatGPT. In many instances, it's not qualified to give such information. It's especially harmful if you're asking it for information for either mental or physical health conditions. And in many instances, that given problematic advice. That's another habit that's changing overall. The final thing is trust, right? Because there are many instances for you wherein ChatGPT or any other LLM is giving you reliable information. You do not trust it, which means you trust it overall, not just for that particular instance or that particular use case. This probably broadens and makes you, well, feel that, hey, the answer I'm getting is right. That is bad, especially when getting advice on topics that ChatGPT may not be qualified to give advice for. So this trust that's being created may not necessarily be a good thing. The second heading that we need to cover is jobs. We have talked about jobs before, but the jobs over here, it's very straightforward. One, who all are losing jobs. Probably people who are in the lower rungs of the ladder are losing jobs. Software engineers are not very specialized. Artistic or creative individuals are once again not very specialized or don't have very tremendous skill sets. Many people who are doing repetitive or iterative tasks, emailing, etc., etc. That would be unfortunate. But they will now be replaced with this AI technology. But are new opportunities being gained? They probably are more easier to start up a business because the prerequisites required in terms of having someone to help you start with software, or having someone help you start with server, etc., are now gone or reduced to a large extent. It's also potentially easier along the lines that now, for example, you need less people to be available for you to set this thing up because, well, very simply, the AI can replace many of those people in their functionalities. But the third thing, and I think also crucially, is that at the point of time, let's say you have AI, that's probably creating new job opportunities that did not exist before, right? Because you're expanding a use case of what is possible and what is not possible. Finally, on work, I want you to imagine how exactly work is changing. Earlier, people used to ask their seniors, hey, can you help me with this? How am I supposed to solve this? Now people ask ChatGPT. Earlier, people used to go ahead and do research on maybe Stack Exchange and many other websites that used to provide professional advice and solutions. Now people copy paste the code into a large language model and expect an answer from it and then make small corrections to it. So this pattern of work is changing. That probably means productivity changes. That probably means your work-life balance changes. Are these changing for the good? Are you getting more time to spend with your family and friends? Are you getting less time? Are you more stressed out? Are you more less stressed out? All of these are also questions worth exploring in terms of, let's say, this new changing protocol. Finally, on training. I think this is fascinating because the training of an AI model to a very large extent affects how, let's say, people interact with it in society. What does this look like? You might have heard a recent controversy where Google had to pull out Bard because Bard was racist. What Bard basically did was it was just bad at identifying black faces and making black people white when it was asked to photo their faces, because there was a certain bias ingrained on it based on the data set it was trained on. Very similarly, there are other biases that can creep into AI models based on the data they're being trained on. If let's say being trained on Reddit data, Reddit is not a particularly PC or let's just say minority friendly community. There are many active people who engage in racism over there, which then means if you're trained on that data, there's more likelihood or more chances of you having a software that gives racist outputs than let's say not. The second thing is on ethics, right? You might have heard many cases of artists complaining that their works being plagiarized via AI, that their copyrights have been changed, they have been infringed upon, that their artistic styles have been entirely copied, that music is being created using their melodies, etc. All this makes or begs a question on ethics. One, whether or not AI is legally allowed to do this. Two, whether or not it's ethically correct. Are you actually transformative? Or are you just straight up copying or ripping off people's life's work? And is it a good thing to be done? Are we losing out creative individuals or not? The final thing is on reliability. There is a large concern that AI models have a tendency to hallucinate. By hallucinate, it means that AI models generate random outputs that may or may not be correlated to the question that are being asked. In many instances, the outputs are almost entirely incorrect or are using information that was not present in the original script or prompt given to them. This begs the question that how reliable are these models, in how critical situations can we use them, and whether or not we should use them in things of large importance. Any questions so far?
No.
Cool. Now, we'll go to the actual science part. I'll keep this a bit quicker because I guess I'm already about time. So now this is much more practical, right? You can probably visualize this much more easier. It's not based on, let's say, the concrete, computer, abstract world of, made up technologies or, let's say, the computerish world of, let's say, AI. This probably thing that happened much more on the ground. You ask very basic questions over here, such as who gets more funding, whether we draw the trade-off or not, whether or not we are willing to spend X over Y, etc., etc. There's a common themes over here. Three main themes. The first is time. How long does these technologies take to build up? Do you require governmental approvals? Do you require land grants, etc., etc.? Is the problem time sensitive? The second thing is in terms of funding. How much money is required? What cost is money coming at? Are we, let's say, taking away money from education to build this thing? Are we taking away money from military to build this thing? If so, is it worth it or is it not? The final thing is in terms of regulation. This is especially heavy in social media motions and things along those lines, where are we regulating this enough? Are we regulating this well enough? Are children actually being influenced by social media, things along those lines? This is mainly on how good government is controlling certain technologies. Cool. This is the activity. Once again, 3 minutes. Read the motion, tell me your ideas. Okay, guys, share your thoughts.
I'm only able to think about one trade-off, but like the comparison is like uh, the thing I'm comparing against is always the same. Like monopoly of one company of one technology versus faster development, and perhaps more money put into resources into um, uh, developing technology versus faster development, and then more job versus faster development.
Cool. Anyone else?
Sir, I had something similar in mind, but also along the lines of how there'll be more competition now, like between scientists in who like creates what research, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. Like competition could incentivize them to like work even harder and like research in like more details. But this competition could also be taken in a negative sense, because now instead of all of the scientists working in one team and channelizing their energy and knowledge, there's a division of talent, because there's different companies in the private sector and there's scientists working in different companies. Then because of this competition there's a division being created, whereas if they were all working in one specific one like united team, then all of them would be able to channelize their knowledge and thoughts into something more productive. Also, there's one more thing, which is that if science is industrialized, then there'll be a more profit-oriented approach instead of a growth-oriented approach for scientists. Because since it's privatized now, there's a higher chance of them getting more profit and them getting paid for it, rather than it being for their interest and for the interest of the society. But also another advantage that they can get because of this industrialization is that there'll be more funds provided, because obviously the private sector will be able to afford that more, and like there'll be better resources for the scientists to be able to work with.
Perfect. So let's go on to, let's say, potential answers. I think there are two aspects of this. The first is in terms of what is going to be researched, which I primarily focus on over here. And the second aspect is, as let's say, Preksha was currently pointing out, in terms of how much money you get and what ability you have to research. So the first thing that you'll notice is that, let's say, if you're having an industry, if you're working in industry, you're going to be much, much more practical, right? The things that you're going to research are probably going to be much more based on what application they can have versus whether or not you have any theoretical value. There's a lot less of, let's say, theoretical physics or, for example, theoretical chemistry or creating new compounds or things along those lines. It's probably much more focused on what tools you can build or what technology you can build to solve a specific problem. The second is that you're going to have much less risk taking. This means that you are not necessarily going to engage or explore fields that are, well, unexplored or potentially are going to not give good returns. You potentially aren't going to go ahead and do procedures that you think have a high chance of failure because you probably want to give certain result in a timely manner. You don't have a 10-year, 15-year time frame to do whatever you want. The final thing is that you are going to reduce or focus on far fewer topics. The reason for the same is simple. You are going to maximize value. You're looking for topics that are most profitable. For example, if you're talking about medicine, you're going to focus on drugs that are there for the best or the most lucrative diseases. These are diseases that affect the most number of people, as compared to diseases that affect very few number of people. There's not as much value in it, there's not much money in it. This being said, Adrian, go ahead.
I got a question. So when it comes to thinking
Yep.
about trade-off, can I say that there is an ultimate trade-off, i.e., let's say something versus faster development in this case of technology, and then below this ultimate trade-off, I have to think about more trade-off, right?
Okay. So the way I look at it is, sure, you can make, let's say, trade-offs very macro level, wherein you're trading off all potential benefits versus one singular benefit. And that's one strategy of doing so. You only do this in the case that you're very confident on that one particular strategy. I would probably say it's better to hedge your bets and have multiple trade-offs, some being more important than others, but still having more impacts allows you to, well, ensure that even if you lose on one, you can win on the other. In many instances, if you put, let's say, all of your eggs in one basket, a team can just dedicate an entire speech to rebutting that one trade-off and potentially take you out of the round. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, a follow-up question. So let's say like you told your, let's say, opening teams and you have multiple trade-off, and then you told the judge that the first trade-off is the most important, but it comes out that the closing teams focus a lot on the first trade-off, and then you basically probably could won the second and third trade-off, but you basically told the judge and other opponents that you try to win on the first trade-off. Then how should I try to prevent this problem?
So look, I think in opening, what you want to do is you want to cover in detail why exactly what you're mentioning or why the trade-off that you're talking about is the most important in this round, and spend a good amount of time weighing it up against other potential attacks. The idea here is as long as you give importance framing, the judge will keep that in mind, and even if the debate shifts, there'll still be a valuable metric for them to judge. In case you don't give any important metrics, then let's say it's very easy for, let's say, the closing team to come up and say, hey, we think this is more important, and hence take that material over here. Using this, I'll now move on to our final few slides. I'll make it a bit quicker. Time, few components of this. First, dependencies. Are you reliant on other projects? Are you reliant on other fundings? Are you reliant on other permissions? If yes, there'll be delays. If no, there are no delays. Second, how long does it take to develop? Is this thing going to be short term? Is it going to be long term? Is it going to happen over a long horizon? For example, renewable technology happens over a long horizon. Something like, let's say, regulating social media that happens on a short horizon. Third, is this problem time sensitive? So are you talking about issues that, well, we have some time to solve? Or are you talking about urgent issues? Like global warming is probably much more urgent. Space exploration, probably far less urgent. And hence, let's say they have different time sensitivities, and hence the dependency on development time over here, how much development time is acceptable for a particular problem will vary. Second part, funding. How much money you're getting? Who is giving you the money? Are there any other alternatives? The idea over here is threefold. This is usually happens in classic debates such as this house will fund space research, etc., etc. The first question is, are you getting private funding or are you getting government funding? If you're getting government funding, the question be asked, do you have any other alternatives? Where exactly is government money coming from? Would this government money be spent on education instead? Would this be spent on health instead? Would that be better off for people? That's one part of it. The second part is, how expensive is it going to be? Are you going to get sufficient return on investment on it? If you're not getting sufficient return on investment on it, then is it worth doing it over more practical, more short-term benefits to people on ground? That's the question that you ask on funding. Who's giving the funding? Is it worth it for them to give the funding? Can you spend the money in a better way? Finally, on regulations. This is a more common theme in social media rounds. The main crux of this is, first, well, who's regulating? Is it going to be the government? If the government's regulating this, how they're regulating it? You might have seen the US Congress, them try to interview or, let's say, summon TikTok and other social media CEOs and drill them for multiple hours on what policies their platforms do and do not have, whether these policies are a good thing or a bad thing, and hence draw conclusions from them. You might have seen in many instances, they may not draw the most effective conclusions from it, or they may draw negative conclusions from the same. So, well, the question first is, what does government do? Do they do it well? The question secondly, on effectiveness is, are there loopholes in this regulation? Are there ways that these companies can skirt around it? Are there ways the companies can avoid this regulation? How long can they avoid this for? And that begs the question, response time. In case there are any regulations, how fast will these regulations evolve with time? Will the governments act fast enough for the harm to be prevented? If they don't act fast enough, how much harm is created in that sense? What is the extent of this harm and how much should we care about it? This well applies for nuclear technology, social media, and many other, let's say, trade-off debates on technology. That's broadly it for the session. Because given limited time here to rush through many sections, but do you have any questions before we conclude this? Hello? Anyone, any questions?
No, sir.
Nope. Okay. In that
Another
case,
question.
yep, go for it.
Do you think it's possible or is it strategic to, let's say, analyze in a debate that this technology impacts a stakeholder and then try to emphasize and take about a few minutes to analyze why this stakeholder is the most vulnerable stakeholder, and therefore probably because of principle of reparation or whatever principle, we have to care about this stakeholder the most, and then um, win through this argument, run through this metric, and ignore all those other stuff that other teams have said. Would it be too risky though?
So yes, I think you can do this, but I think it's probably a component of it around. In many instances, we probably want to say why a stakeholder is affected, but realistically, the degree to which a stakeholder is affected is well affected by many holistically as possible, wherein you probably one flesh out the entire round of what possibilities exist, whether or not well as the whether or not the factors we have discussed previously apply or not, and then zero in on one stakeholder and say to what degree are they affected and how important is that particular stakeholder. You probably don't talk about a stakeholder until you have done all the prerequisite groundwork before.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. I will now stop sharing my screen, and well, recording stopped as well.